so now I have to introduce Simon, which is a great pleasure. I've known Simon, we think about 10 years.
Yeah.
I've known him since he was a boy. Like all of us, Simon is... Anne Maston talks about ordinary magic when she talks about resilience. And I guess like all of us, Simon is an ordinary person. And he's also an extraordinary person. He's an ordinary person who does extraordinary things. And he's also a person that I really greatly admire, personally. And he's one of my favourite people, actually.
Thank you.
And I've heard this presentation before, and it's brilliant. So I'm sure you'll really enjoy it. Yeah, that's it. I'll just introduce you to Simon Duncan. Take it away.
All right. It's great to see you all here. I know it's not the best weather outside, and we could all be in Marbella if we had to go for it. So thank you for making it to dreary Brighton. As you know already, I'm Simon Duncan, and I'll just give you an outline of what we're going to do today before we get started. So, firstly, I'm just going to cover some ground and say what resilience is, and we'll have a few suggestions because it's a term everybody can use. And then I'll speak about my personal story of resilience, and then move that on and link it to how that links to the resilience framework, which is what we're going to do later in a short group exercise. So be ready, everybody. I'm going to get you working. Now, because I'm lazy and I'm in my 20s, basically, I want to get you guys to start thinking before we start. I'm going to pose a question. What are some of the ways that you guys would define resilience?
Who has a definition of resilience?
Go for it.
Oh, I heard it described as being elastic. You know, if you pull it away, it comes back. Back to it. So being able to come back to, I suppose, to overcome, to regain your strength after a blow or a crisis, maybe.
So kind of be pulled off balance and then come back to where you were originally, like.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Okay, that's very good. Like being flexible and kind of still not being altered or pushed is what you're getting at. Any other definitions? Go for it.
I think of resilience. I think of someone being able to consistently do something despite outside events. You know, sort of consistently get up and do your job or do what you need to do each day, despite any problems or difficulties or obstacles that might come in your way.
So like power in the face of adversity and pushing through forward. Any other definitions? Got any others? Just those two. Okay. So here are some ways to think about resilience. Now these are basically looked through different definitions of resilience, so Ungar and Rutter, and paraphrase those to make it a little bit more accessible. Not that I'm sure that you don't all tuck into academic journals at night to get you guys off to sleep, but I figured this might be a little bit more accessible. So resilience is your own way to find mental, emotional and physical ways to cope and hopefully succeed in tough situations, including succeeding not only on your own, but accessing support to help. It's also about doing better than you expected, despite the odds. So, like a traditional Hollywood underdog story, you came in and you fought and you did better than you expected. And it's also about not passively accepting negative and unfair situations. So it's having the ability to change them through outside agencies, pushing for different things. So for example, we could say the buses in London, for example, used to be terrible for disabled access. But now, because of protests from groups, people with disabilities, they're a lot better than they were 10 years ago. If we liken it to this flower, for example, it hasn't seen much love, it's not been fed, it's not been watered, it's in barren earth, and yet it not only survives, but thrives. And this is our very own Angie Hart's definition, or Hart and Gagnon's definition of resilience. It's about beating the odds while at the same time changing the odds. Sorry, I like Looney Tunes, I just had to get that in there. Oh, sorry. So now, after you've heard some definitions of resilience, you might think of resilient people looking something like that. This is certainly not Sparta. Everyone has the ability to be resilient. We don't all have to come out and be everyday warriors tackling problems. We can all be resilient in different ways. Okay. So I'm going to move on to my story of resilience, and hopefully that sheds a bit more light on what I've just said. Okay, so I was born on March 3rd, 1992, and it's important for two reasons. Firstly, it's my birthday, so if anybody remembers and likes this presentation that much, please feel free to send gifts. Secondly, I was supposed to be born on May 13th, 1992. Being born 10 weeks premature means that, or meant that the motor centre in my brain is underdeveloped, and therefore my legs don't work as well as they should, and my arms twitch, giving me a condition called cerebral palsy. At the time in 1992, attitudes towards disability were very negative, even more negative than they are now. If you had a disability, people in power and Parliament believed that you were useless. Effectively, you were a strain on the welfare state. You, perhaps in some cases, didn't deserve to be alive. There was nothing as progressive as, say, the Meet the Superhumans campaign for the Paralympics, recently for Channel 4 out there now, and as of a few weeks ago, or just yesterday in fact, saw the return of the Superhumans for the Rio 2020 Paralympics. Fortunately for me, my mother is a warrior in sheep's clothing, or kaftan dress, or whatever she decides to wear. So she decided to alter my environment for the better, to enable me to be resilient. She did this firstly by pushing me out of the council house we were in, which was on a tower block, and ensuring that my house was accessible. She provided a safe home. She was also resilient herself. When my father left, she had to act as two parents and push through and be happy despite her own internal emotional crisis. Again, going back to transportation and accessing the world, at the time, transportation for disabled people wasn't as accessible as it is now. So she went out and got a driver's license to enable me to access the world around me. And most importantly, she taught me how to value myself, which is one of the biggest lessons I still hold for myself today. Okay. So here's just a few things my mum taught me about valuing myself, and I'd like to share that with you now. So my mum has always said, like, the world is to quote Rocky, or maybe this is just my generation, I don't think she quoted Rocky, but the world is a very mean and nasty place, and it will chew you up and beat you to your knees if you're not ready for it. So basically what she's saying is that the world isn't a very fair place. It's not always meritocratic. Sometimes we don't get what we deserve, but you still have to push through. So Dita Von Teese, a very famous burlesque artist, says you could be the most beautiful orange in the world, but there will always be people who don't like oranges. And even I tend to liken this specifically to discrimination. So you could be a really powerful person and a really strong, say, disability advocate, but there will always be people out there who don't necessarily like people with disabilities. Further from that, your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see your worth. You have to have an internal frame of reference and say, fair enough, this person doesn't respect what I do, they don't like me, they hate where I come from, they hate the chair, but I'm still valuable. That doesn't make me any less of a person. And my favourite from Dr. Wayne Dyer is when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. She taught me that my disability didn't always have to be viewed as a hindrance. It could be viewed in a positive way, a way to see the world differently, help other people, become a motivator, even an inspirational figure if that's what I wanted to do, and I could always find ways in an able-bodied world to succeed. However, that's not to say that positive thinking will get us everywhere, right? So I'd like to just perform a quick thought experiment, everybody, if you close your eyes for a few seconds, okay? I'd like us all to imagine me, and think really, really positively, everybody, just standing up out of this chair and just opening the door, just as normal, as someone who can walk would, okay? Is everybody thinking? Okay, good, good. Okay, just 5 more seconds. Okay, open your eyes. I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna do it. Better not, it hasn't worked. And it's true, it's unfortunate. Maybe that will happen on the next talk, but who knows? Obviously, action is needed in this case. I need accessible ramps, disabled toilets, even someone to help me perhaps. So positive thinking won't get you everywhere. It's half the battle. but we need action alongside positive thought. And as part of pushing myself to action, when I was very young, I had really strong role models alongside my mother, so in the kind of public eye. So the first person on the left is Baroness Henny Ray Thompson. And the reason she is one of my favourite role models is because she's a woman, so she's subject to sexism, but also she's athletic and now more politically active than ever. I don't know if you've seen recently, but she organised a protest for wheelchair services where people rolled up to Parliament in actual wheelbarrows to galvanise government to improve services. So she appeals not only to the part of me that's physically active, but also the part of me that's politically active. And on the right here we have Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking is obviously one of the greatest minds in the world. Despite his chair, he's very intellectual, he's powerful, he speaks at forums, he's confident, and that's what appeals to me, his intellectual ability and his ability to kind of, entrance or inspire millions of people through his speech. But it's important to remember also that role models are human. They will make mistakes alongside everybody else. Just because Stephen Hawking is divorced and I've taken him as a role model doesn't mean that I'm going to end up divorced. I'm not even married yet. So, touch wood, give me 10 years and we'll see if that comes true, but I doubt it. I hope not. Okay. So, again, moving on to nursery and primary school, as I said, attitudes towards disability were overwhelmingly negative in the 1990s. And as a result, I was placed in a special nursery because of my inability to walk. This meant that in this particular place, I was just looked after. I wasn't given any of the skills to, even on the level I was at then, think independently, become employable, and work for the future, work in the future. But the good thing about being placed in a special nursery is that it helped to actually normalise disability for me and show me the spectrum of disability, so everything from my own cerebral palsy to autism to Down syndrome, things like that. However, one caveat to that is that while I was at special nursery, I wasn't achieving as much as I should have. And there's one reason for that, Mum will always say, it's because that was a comfort zone. Because I was so comfortable there, I wasn't achieving. And I'll just prove it to you briefly. Okay, who's ever tried to lose weight after Christmas or after a holiday when you pigged out on the buffet? Okay. Please be honest, this is a space of no judgment. Cool. Okay. And doesn't it suck when you get off the plane and you think, damn, I've got to go and get to the gym, or I've got to go and eat like rice and beans for weeks and weeks to get this off. But obviously, it's that kind of work that pushes you out of your comfort zone and hopefully enables great rewards at the end, despite the grimness at the beginning. Okay, so as a result, Mum kind of very directly pushed me out of my comfort zone. She's a strong woman, so she said, all right, this is how things are going to be, and pushed me towards mainstream school. Now, here, disability wasn't the norm. I was the only disabled student in a field of about 150. So people would stare, people would say, oh, what can he do? I don't quite understand him. What's going on? But at this point, I had to understand that disability in the world I was in now wasn't and isn't the norm as people would ascribe to it. I had to effectively shield myself against that and say, okay, they're only watching because they're inquisitive, and it's okay to find common ground between those people and try and become almost like a citizen of the world within that small within the smallness of the primary school. Okay. During this time, another thing that made it difficult was I had several operations, so my education was quite broken up at this point. I had about 4 operations. Now, I don't know if you can see there, that's my foot there. And there's a scar. Can everybody see that? Okay, cool. That's great. One time we couldn't. Apologies, it's not a better image, but in order to take a photo of another scar, I'd have to have a close-up of my bottom, which is not quite what I was trying to achieve today. Which not only further marked me out in terms of missing blocks of my education with a disability, So at points, I felt much like that white stone among the dark ones, very alienated and very blocked out. Emotional resilience also came into play very sadly at a point when I was about 8. A friend passed away, and this taught me a very valuable lesson, that our time on this earth is limited, so why should I let anybody's attitudes toward myself stop me from achieving what I wanted? As a translated Buddhist proverb says, it's later than you think, get to it. So, moving on to secondary school. I was in Elliott School, which some of you may be interested in, is the set of part of Love Actually. So, maybe not, but fair enough. And partly because I'm original comprehensive, in the centre of London, it's a very diverse mix of backgrounds, different wealths, different sexualities, different races. So here, this gave rise to conflict from 2 factors. Not only the fact it was very diverse and people were from different communities and didn't necessarily understand each other, but the fact, obviously, we're all going through puberty at this point. Hormones are flying everywhere. Everyone's freaking out over minor things because their bodies aren't yet prepared to deal with the emotional strain. And so that, it was a very tricky time for me. Yeah. Because of the conflict as well, this was a very specific time in which people would start to attack me for my disability because they're trying to assert their own identities versus other people. So I would be called things like spastic or cripple or retard, different words that would initially really upset me, and I would sometimes be going home and crying for hours and hours. But eventually I realized that when people were trying to shout me down for my disability, they're effectively trying to do this. Sorry, can I have my volunteer? Is that okay? Oops, sorry.
That one.
Yeah. Okay, not to worry. I'm too young to have gone 50 Shades of Grey just yet. They're effectively trying to do this. If everybody can see this, most importantly, I'm stuck here. I can't move. I can't achieve my goals. So I had to find a way to free myself. If I can. There we go. It worked. Okay. So one of the ways I did this was, I'm coming back. So, knowing your hot buttons. Now, Sun Tzu, a very famous Chinese war tactician, says, if you know yourself, you can win 100 battles without a single loss. So I had to effectively guard myself against people using terminology against people with disabilities to affect me. So, for example, things like spastic, cripple, retard, or pushing my chair without permission. I had to know that might happen. And to this day, it's even helped. Some people might even call me a retard on the street, but I'll just look at them and say, seriously, is that the best you can do? I mean, I've had this material for nigh on 10 years. And also, another thing when things really got to me is about effective conflict resolution. Now, I'm sure some of you already have an idea that when we are in stressful situations like confrontations or we're fearful, it triggers a fight or flight response within us. Now, this is a prehistoric mechanism from when we were all cavemen and cavewomen and had to run away from saber-toothed tigers, so it served a purpose, but maybe isn't quite so useful in civilized society. At this time, obviously, as I mentioned, your heart rate, you start to sweat, and there's a desire to eliminate or run away from the threat immediately. But again, I'm not one for violence, and I don't think violence is the best policy in this case, especially. So take a few seconds to calm yourself. Try and understand at least where they're coming from. Maybe they're saying something because they're also annoyed. Give a measured response to the situation, or as measured as possible. I know it's tricky. I've been there. It's difficult. And once it's handled, try to let things go. again, like, things will only have power over you as long as you let them. The person who perhaps annoyed you feels free now, whereas if you're still annoyed about it, you're still being held down. So take time to socialize, play computer games, have a hug. Another method I use to stop people reducing me down to the single aspect of my personality, the wheelchair, was to build my self-confidence. So I took managed risks, but didn't let fear control my life, to prove to myself and to others that I wasn't just, some cripple in a wheelchair. So I did this through, firstly, working with Anne, doing public speaking to improve my confidence. Anne will tell you that when I began at the York, I was pretty mousy, very quiet, and hopefully it's showing you that I'm not at this point. I'm also deathly afraid of heights, so I took up rock climbing at different points just to prove I could do it. Obviously, it was safe, I was belted in, so I wasn't going to fall to my death, fortunately. And also sport, because physicality to me is a big part of my personality. Again, because the physical disability, being strong and powerful, is a way to prove to other people that you are strong, and obviously the medals help to prove that accolade. And finally, most recently actually, I began to work with Terence Higgins Trust, which is a sexual health charity. Now, there's a lot of stereotypes around people with disabilities not knowing anything about sex or being infantile. So I wanted to come in and be trained up and teach people about effective sexual health. So when I come into a session, you can imagine how many drawers are on the floor. So using all the self-confidence and power that I built up, I took this to university. Now, again, because of just your disability adding on extra weight and people being forced to be resilient in the face of disability discrimination of varying forms, it's less likely that people with disabilities will make it to university. So I was happy to beat the odds there. Okay? And leaving home, again, because I'm quite well bonded with my mum, she's been a warrior, and now I'm starting to pick up the mantle in that way. It was a big mix of emotions, but because of how much I confronted prior, I knew that I could do it. And also, I knew with all the fallout risks I'd taken, I'd be able to make the most of every opportunity I'd been given, even if I was scared. And again, some seminar groups I was in weren't that amazing. Sometimes you have to work with people you hate in working life or in just personal life even. So I knew that through resilience training, I'd be able to handle the negative people perhaps, or people that weren't willing to work with me, and achieve my goals regardless of their outlook. Okay, so moving on to continuing battles. Again, resilience is something that has to be maintained. You can be strong one day, and then the following day you could be diagnosed with something like cancer, and then you have to build yourself back up again. It's an ongoing thing. We're not just powerful because we say we're powerful. Much like going to the gym. Like, if I get off the pull-up bar and eat a takeaway, then I'll come back fat and have to start again. And again, particularly for me, the reason I have to be resilient is because of the political situation angled towards disabled people because of our current government. Benefits are being slashed. People describing disabled people in the media as scroungers, and it's tricky to get employed at the moment. Also, if you can see that photo there, another thing I had to do to again pick up the mantle from my mum when she learned to drive for my benefit is learn to drive for myself. If you see me in London streets looking like that, you know that I have, but I'm scared to death. And also organisation. If you see my desk there, yeah, the less said about that, the better. And the most important lesson I can leave everybody with in this room is to know the impact that you have on others. Because everybody's going through their battles, and the more that we can engage with people on an effective basis and try not to force them to be resilient, the better. So for example, I'm very fortunate that my disability is visible. People can automatically identify me as somebody that may need help, may need extra support, but say someone who's on the autistic spectrum, that you might need extra time to understand that, and also appreciate that they're going through their own battle. Perhaps even parents, maybe a child has had a tantrum and they're really angry, but we can't respond in anger. But for the people that we know, it takes a while to know people and understand what they're going through. So that's what I'm getting at. And so, in a quick summary here, my top 6 strategies to build resilience are: have role models, push yourself out of your comfort zone as much as possible, because as you push yourself out, that becomes charted ground. You become more used to pushing yourself out of your comfort zone in that particular thing you did. So, for example, with me in public speaking, I hope that's gotten better. Build self-confidence, know your hot buttons, resolve conflict helpfully, and minimize the negative impact you have on other people and the negative impact that others, and even yourself, can have on you through patterns of negative self-thought. Thanks for listening. Does anyone have any questions? I hope it was useful.